Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
With Trump's tariffs now on pause, many Canadians are breathing sighs of relief. But we're not out of the woods yet. The federal government has less than a month to negotiate a deal to avoid the worst of a trade war with the U.S. Canadian businesses and consumers are on edge, perhaps none more so than those in border communities. There are cities and towns along both sides of the Canada-U.S. border from coast to coast, sharing local culture and with intertwined local economies. Thousands of people cross the border every day to go to work, to school, to shop, and to dine at restaurants. They may not have the same passports, but they live side by side as neighbors. These border communities are literally on the front line in a trade war. I'm David Smith. Today on The Big Story, I'm joined by the Mayor of Windsor, Ontario, Drew Dilkens. He is chair of the Border Mayors Alliance, a group of mayors of border communities from across the country advocating against U.S. tariffs. Hi, Mr. Dilkens. Thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Hi, David. My pleasure to be with you.
So you must be breathing a sigh of relief after Monday's news. How are you feeling about this 30-day pause on the tariffs?
Well, I'm on one hand, I'm feeling really good that there seem to be some brighter minds that prevailed in the course of the next month, and hopefully conversations and dialogue will continue to make sure that we don't see a tariff applied in Canada. But at the same time, in day 30, day 31, what happens next? The anvil is sort of still hanging over our heads, so to speak, and we still have an amount of uncertainty with respect to what the future looks like on the tariff front. And so let's celebrate today because it's better news than it was yesterday, but I'm still looking a month down the road and wondering what it's going to look like then.
Yeah, anvil hanging over the head. This week I've used the analogy Lucy with a football. It's all very kind of up in the air. So tell me a bit about the Border Mayors Alliance. Why did you feel it was necessary to come together as a group of representatives for border communities specifically?
Yeah, we've got over 20 mayors across Canada from BC to New Brunswick, many stops in between, a lot of folks in Ontario who know firsthand, because of our geography, because of our proximity to the United States, that any tariff, including a 25% tariff, is going to hit our communities first and hit us the hardest. And I like to use the example of my city as one of the best examples because Windsor is the automotive capital of Canada. And just literally a kilometer and a half away from City Hall is the city of Detroit, which of course is the Motor City and the U.S. auto capital. And because of that proximity and because of decades and decades of free trade and trade alliances with the United States and Mexico, the supply chains in the auto industry have been built up so tight that it's almost impossible to say that a vehicle that rolls off the assembly line in Detroit or in Windsor is made by U.S. or Canadians, because the parts that go into those vehicles really cross the border on average 6 to 7 times before they roll off the finish line. They're really made by the hands of men and women in all 3 countries. And so we know, because of that integration, because of these supply chains, that if a tariff were to be put in place, it is going to impact our community very, very quickly. The pain will be felt very, very quickly. And not just here, but also in Detroit as well. It's almost an equal reaction in the city of Detroit because of the integration of the supply chains. And so the Border Mayors Alliance was all about reflecting the fact that communities like ours on border cities, or having border cities and border towns, we are going to be hit first, hit the hardest, and we needed to make sure that our voice was heard in the conversation.
And more broadly than that, more generally, can you describe a little bit what it's like to live in a border town for listeners who've never been to one? How intertwined are things, really?
Yeah, so Windsor, Detroit's really a good example because we're the 2 largest urban areas on either side of the U.S.-Canada border. We are the absolute closest jurisdictions that you can find of this size. And so I like to use the example that from my office at City Hall to the Windsor-Detroit Tunnel, the border crossing is about 200 meters away. And if you have a Nexus card, if I wanted to go from Windsor to Detroit to my favorite Thai restaurant for lunch today, with a Nexus card, it's 9 minutes door to door. And so for Windsorites, we've got this great, safe Canadian city, which is fantastic. And then we want all the best of sports and entertainment and concerts and dining and shopping. We literally are 10 minutes away from all of that on the other side of the border. So Detroit for us is our backyard. It's where we go to have fun. There are families that are built up. My brother being a great example. He went to school in Michigan and met his wife, his soon-to-be wife. He married her. They moved to Michigan, lived there for the last 30 years. And so there are thousands and thousands of stories like that that have been built up because of the geography and the proximity. Kids go to school. They go to university on both sides of the border. There are high schools. Folks go to Country Day in Detroit and live in Windsor. For perspective on employment, we have about 6,000 people who live in Windsor and cross to work in Detroit every day to work as nurses and doctors and engineers in the city of Detroit, but live here in the city of Windsor. So our economies are very tightly integrated, obviously on the supply chain side, but also on the human side.
Yeah. What are you hearing this week from business owners in your community, Mayor? A lot of anxiety. Are people already taking action, retooling businesses, maybe making continuity plans? What's the situation?
Yeah, 100%. And so you had kind of two disparate groups. There was a group of folks who were, okay, we don't have time for any emotion. We're not angry. Let's just figure out what plan B is. What supply chain are we going to go to? What product can we move to the United States in advance of a tariff to give us some more breathing room? You had that kind of dialogue going on. And then you had the other side of the equation, which were, folks that were just really scared. Like, what's this going to mean? Should I be buying anything? Should we be booking a vacation? Let's just wait and see. Let's not spend anything. And, what's my plan B for my family if I get laid off or my wife gets laid off and we don't have a steady income, especially at this time where we had no certainty. There is no certainty on what federal or provincial supports would be available if the tariff were actually to take effect. And so you do have a lot of businesses putting together their plan Bs and plan Cs. And the dangerous part here is really looking at alternate supply chains. So perhaps we're not going to be as reliant in the future on the United States because it's just so easy to be reliant because of the way things have been built up. I think we have to look elsewhere. And I think it's fair to say, even as a nation, looking at breaking down trade barriers, I think is extremely sensible. And this should be a call to action for us collectively as a nation to break down our interprovincial trade barriers and also look at those pipelines. Look at pipelines that can serve, East and West Coast and bring our goods, our minerals and resources to other customers so that we're not so reliant on the United States moving forward.
You mentioned emotions there. I'd like to pick up on that. The scenes of hockey fans booing the national anthem, the U.S. national anthem, have made a lot of news, gone viral online. In a border community such as yours, are you worried about conflict between neighbors the longer this situation drags out?
Well, it is the disheartening part of the conversation. And I bet that every single Canadian who was at one of those sporting events who booed the U.S. national anthem, I know they did it and I know why they did it. And I know the feeling that brought that about. But I would be willing to bet 99.99% of those folks who did that felt bad having to do it. In a typical Canadian way, would have apologized for having to boo the U.S. national anthem. And so to see even yesterday in I think it was in Nashville, the Americans boo the Canadian national anthem, you realize sort of the thin edge of the wedge here that that this can turn sour very, very quickly, and it ought not to. We're each other's largest trading partners, but more than that, we have been friends and neighbors and allies for more than a century. It makes no sense to start turning on each other because of one person. And, I've been asked many times, about my relationship with the United States and am I angry and this and that. And the reality is I'm not angry. I know who is responsible for this, and it's not the American people. It's one American. And so not one person is not going to destroy a century of history and relationships and good common sense. We're just going to have to figure out how to deal with this. And the best part is, if there is a silver lining, we've been through a term of Donald Trump before, right? Like this is not new to us. His personality and behavior is not new to us. In his first term, there was a lot of shock and awe at the things that he would say, and you're shocked and surprised, and I can't believe the president said that. There's almost nothing Donald Trump could say or do that would shock me anymore. It's just part of his personality, and you're never going to change the guy's personality. So we're going to have to figure out how to roll with the punches. I certainly wish our prime minister and the president had a good working relationship. I think it's clear that relationship is strained. And we'd certainly benefit from a federal election here that would allow us to reset with certainty for a period of 4 years and make sure that we both have people in place. Well, they have their person in place, but that Canadians have their person in place as a leader of the country that can develop the relationship and provide the certainty to our largest trading partner moving forward. I think it would be really helpful for us economically.
You say that nothing Trump says surprises you at this point. I would like to ask you about something that he has been saying. He keeps saying that the U.S. doesn't need Canadian cars. He said that repeatedly, quote, "We don't need their cars." It's obviously a mischaracterization of how the auto sector works. As the mayor of Windsor, what's your reaction to that line? Is that a little bit offensive to you?
Well, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's clear he doesn't have a full understanding. His comments appeal to folks who, aren't scratching the surface in any way. It's very clear for a long time, for decades, in fact, since the 1960s, that we've built strong relationships in the auto sector. And I remember very clearly, when the first free trade agreement was brought into effect with Brian Mulroney at the time, there was a huge amount of fear in my community, mostly expressed by unions, that there was going to be widespread job losses to the United States. This was going to be bad for business. People were going to be harmed. Families were going to be on the street, and this didn't make any sense. And when the free trade agreement took hold, in just a couple years, you saw just the opposite happen. It actually grew the trade pie. More vehicles were sold, more people were hired in both countries, and it ended up being a very, very positive thing for the auto industry and many other industries for that matter. But certainly for the auto industry, it was very, very positive after the free trade agreement was brought into effect. And then it was so positive that upon further renegotiation, they said, gosh, we should bring Mexico into the equation here and really make it North American free trade. And the same kind of conversation, oh my God, all of these jobs are going to be lost to the low-cost country, Mexico. It's going to decimate our industry. Things are going to be bad. Families on the street. And the reality is it continued to grow the pie. More people are better off in Mexico now. It helped raise the standard of living for a lot of folks there. It created more jobs, more cars were sold, and everyone benefited. At the end of the day, in any way you analyze this, all countries benefited from having a North American free trade agreement. And so the thought that we're going to sort of roll back the cassette tape and get to a point where we're not going to have free trade and we're going to put the genie in the bottle and the president's going to repatriate all of the supply chains and all of the manufacturing, it doesn't make any sense. It's counterintuitive, frankly, and it'll only do harm to a lot of American jobs, both in terms of the inflationary impact, in terms of the job impact, and just in terms of the practicality of all of this. It is almost unconscionable to think that you could repatriate entire supply chains and manufacturing facilities in any reasonable period of time within the term of one president. And so, I just think it makes no sense for those who are actually intelligent and understand the economics of what has been created between our three countries. And to the extent that we have friction, to the extent that we have disputes that, we need to resolve, the good thing is there are dispute resolution mechanisms built in to CUSMA and USMCA that we have used. And on some occasions, Canada's been successful, and some occasions we have not. But at least a neutral third-party adjudicator is looking at that and making a decision based on the merits and the facts. And so it's disheartening to think that the threat of this was really about border security and drugs. I have a hard time believing that. Some had said it's probably about an early renegotiation of what was called NAFTA. I don't think it needed to get this far to get all the parties to the table. And so the real question is, what's this really about? What is the end game here? Where are we going? What's going to happen 30 days from now and 60 days from now? And I say 60 days from now because March, early part of March brings us to the 30-day window. But don't forget, on Donald Trump's first day in office, he issued an executive order that had his cabinet secretaries reporting back by April the 1st on these types of issues, looking at unfair trade, counterfeit goods, and currency manipulation. So there are things that have been put in motion by the president that leave a great amount of uncertainty out there for a lot of us, that I think the sooner we can get leadership in place that allows us to get the certainty, the better it will be for all of us, because the one thing that is really, really bad for business is uncertainty.
Okay. Looking ahead into the future, you have a big EV battery plant being built there in Windsor. Nexstar, owned by Stellantis and LG, could be receiving up to $15 billion, all told, in government subsidies. I believe that's slated to open near the end of this year. Are you worried about the future of that plant, given the trade environment now?
Well, I mean, of course, I'd be foolish to say that I don't have some concern about that, but the reality is LG and Stellantis are putting in about $6 billion into this facility, which has been built and is now being fit up. And so the thought that you can just, disassemble everything and move it somewhere else, that is not easy. Like that would take a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of cost, and it makes no sense. At the end of the day, you see our battery factory here in Windsor, but just within 200 miles or 300 miles of the border, you've got 7 or 8 other battery factories being constructed in the United States. And that speaks to the market that those companies see, the need to satisfy. And so am I worried? Yeah, because we have a huge investment, and I'd be foolish to say that I don't have that in the back of my mind. Do I think it's just reasonable to suspect that this is all going to go away because of a threat of a tariff? I don't think so. I have to believe that people are much smarter than this, and that, bright minds will prevail at the end of the day. But I would like to have the certainty in place to know what the rules of engagement are moving forward, so that we can all follow those rules and have some certainty in terms of attracting more investment that is going to help support these types of big investments that are coming to our communities, and ultimately hire more people in both countries.
In closing today, Mayor Dilkens, what is your message on behalf of border communities to American and Canadian leaders who are negotiating these tariff deals?
Well, again, I would go back to certainty. Sit down, figure this out. What are the issues where we have differences, where there's friction? Let's create the pathway. Let's chart the course on how we can both be successful moving forward. And I should say all of us. It's Mexico, Canada, and the United States. We've built an incredible alliance over the last couple of decades. It's proven to be highly successful. Let's remove our points of friction and figure out how we can continue to grow this entire continent for the benefit of all of our residents. It's in our best interest to do that.
Mayor Dilkens, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
And again, that is Drew Dilkens. He is the mayor of Windsor, Ontario, and also the chair of the Border Mayors Alliance, speaking with us about what it's like in this back and forth, tit-for-tat, possible trade war. Lots of uncertainty and political chaos, affecting perhaps the most those who live side by side with Americans in border communities from coast to coast across Canada. That was The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or on any other of your favorite podcast players. Please remember to rate, review, follow, and share. I'm David Smith. Until next time, thank you for listening.